5 seconds of silence. How Jasmine Crockett exposed truth in America's highest court. The cold stabbed through the marble steps like a warning. Reporters had been outside since dawn. Inside, every seat was taken. Senators, aides, press. They didn't come for justice. They came to watch Jasmine Crockett fall. In heels, measured and steady, she entered alone. No staff, no entourage, just one folder and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't look at anyone, didn't smile. Every step said, "I'm not here to ask permission." People watched, waiting for her to break. She didn't. She sat like she belonged to more than any of them, like she'd come not to defend but to expose. Then the doors opened. Silence fell. Chief Justice John Roberts entered, robe sweeping, eyes sharp. He moved like power personified. His gaze found Jasmine, held it, and then the first strike. "Miss Crockett, let's be clear. This is a courtroom, not your press room." Laughter followed, quiet, cutting. A few smirks, a few stifled chuckles. It was meant to rattle her. It didn't. She stayed still, eyes forward, because silence in the right hands is not surrender. It's strategy. The judge's nod was barely perceptible, but to Elliot Drayton, it was a curtain rising. He stood with practiced ease, shoulders squared, jacket smooth, voice locked and ready. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. His authority came not from force but from precision. "Members of the jury," he began, walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. "What you're about to hear may sound like politics, but it's not. This case isn't about debate or disagreement. It's about boundaries and what happens when a public official crosses them." His fingers held up a single page, the text enlarged in bold type. On February 15th, during a televised White House press briefing, Miss Jasmine Crockett said, "Our northern trade rivals are on their knees thanks to President Trump's tariff brilliance." He let it land. The silence afterward wasn't just polite. It was loaded. "That's not neutral analysis," he continued. "That's not government transparency. That is praise packaged as policy, and it was delivered on the American taxpayer's dime." He turned slightly, pacing now, not nervously but like someone laying the final tiles of trap. "Now, the Hatch Act doesn't ban federal employees from speaking," he explained, his tone tightening. "It bans them from campaigning while acting in their official capacity, from using their position to influence elections or promote specific political figures. That line between service and partisanship is sacred, and when someone speaks from the White House podium with that kind of language, they are not just breaking protocol. They are breaking the law." He placed a transcript on the evidence table, his movements controlled as if setting down a weapon. "But that's not the full picture," he added, glancing toward the judge. "Not even close." A shift in tone, a shift in posture. He stepped back to his table and opened a locked silver case. "This morning," he said, drawing breath, "my office received additional material, a short audio recording submitted by an anonymous source. We have not yet verified its technical origin, but its content, well, let's just say it speaks louder than any document ever could." The courtroom tensed. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge narrowed his gaze. Drayton held up the flash drive between his fingers like a loaded round. "The voice you're about to hear is unmistakably Miss Crockett's, captured off microphone seconds after the same briefing. No teleprompters, no press agents. Just her, unfiltered." He crossed the room, inserted the drive into the courtroom laptop, and stood back. The screen flickered. Static burst from the speakers. Then her voice, calm, low, and devastatingly clear. "They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming." It was 5 seconds long, but it hit like a detonation. One juror exhaled through clenched teeth. Another scribbled something hastily. A whisper spread from the back of the gallery to the front like a slow-rising wind. Even a seasoned congressional reporter flinched, glancing toward the defense table with eyebrows raised. Drayton stood still, letting the silence crawl. Then, without looking away from the jury, he said, "That was not analysis. That was not context. That was retribution. It wasn't said to inform. It was said to punish." He let the words hang like smoke. When a federal official, speaking with the full weight of the U.S. government behind her, declares that dissent deserves consequences. That's no longer public communication. That's weaponized speech. He turned slightly, his voice sharpening. She wasn't targeting a policy. She was targeting people, Americans, foreign allies, journalists, lawmakers, anyone she disagreed with. He pointed to the screen, still paused on the waveform of her voice. And she didn't say it in a moment of passion. She said it in a moment of privacy when she thought no one was listening. But someone was. By now, the courtroom was no longer reacting. It was reeling. The press gallery had gone from quiet note-taking to frantic messaging. The jurors sat back, some arms folded, others stunned still. Drayton saw it. He stepped forward again, voice now just above a whisper. This is exactly why the Hatch Act exists. Not just to prevent slogans at press briefings, but to stop power from becoming permission, to protect the American people from the slow erosion of law into personal agenda. He turned once more to face the bench. Your Honor, we recognize that anonymous submissions must be scrutinized, but the court heard what we heard. 5 seconds, 5 words, and a window into intent that no transcript could ever show. His tone dropped further. And now the question isn't whether Miss Crockett violated a statute. It's whether this courtroom is willing to pretend she didn't. And across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Eyes forward. No fidgeting. No outrage. But behind that silence was something stronger than anger. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't shaken. She had expected this exact moment. Every ounce of it. Because she knew truth can be manipulated, but doubt only needs one seed to grow. The prosecutor's words still echoed when the judge looked toward the defense table and said, Miss Crockett, you may respond. It was a loaded invitation, and everyone knew it. The gallery was leaning forward, jurors still processing the 5-second clip, and even the court stenographer had paused her typing for a breath. All eyes were on Jasmine, but she didn't move right away. She remained seated, her fingers gently resting on the leather folder in front of her, as if she were waiting for the noise to settle in people's heads before speaking into the silence that would follow. Then, without urgency, she rose. No flinch, no tight jaw, just calm, controlled. She picked up the folder and walked toward the center like a woman crossing a battlefield, not a courtroom. Every step echoed like punctuation. She stopped. The folder remained closed in her hands. Her eyes swept once, only once, across the jury, then straight to the judge. Her voice, when it came, was even, clear, sharper than anything said that morning. If this were a performance, she said, pausing between each word, I would congratulate the prosecution. The words hung in the air, razor-edged, because what Mr. Drayton just gave us was a masterclass in theatrical storytelling. She looked down briefly, then back up. If we criminalize federal employees for referencing accurate government data in briefings, we don't just silence voices. We sabotage transparency. She paused, not for effect but to let it land. Then she lifted one final sheet from her folder. And since the prosecution wants to reduce this trial to 5 seconds of audio, she said, locking eyes with the jury, let me give you the entire sentence. She cleared her throat and read directly from the official transcript. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. She looked back up. That's the quote. Full stop. That's what I actually said. They played 5 words. They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming. And they stopped right before the point. Right before the part where I called for restraint, not retribution. For leadership, not arrogance. Now let's address the real reason this case exists, she said, eyes locking onto the prosecution table. It's not because I praise a sitting president. It's not because I violated election law. It's because I'm not the kind of spokesperson they expected to speak with authority. Because when someone like me stands at that podium and speaks plainly, it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. And instead of challenging my facts, they question my right to speak them. Her voice didn't tremble. It sharpened. But the Hatch Act wasn't written to police discomfort. It was written to protect the democratic process. And I did nothing to interfere with it. She turned slightly now, addressing not just the jury but the whole room. There was no call to vote. No political fundraising. No partisan language. I didn't use my position to sway an election. I used it to report results. She gestured calmly to the folder. The courtroom was still, caught in the silence Jasmine had created, a different kind of silence this time. Not one of doubt, but of discomfort. Controlled discomfort. She saw it, and she stepped right into it. And now she began, her voice lower, calmer, but with a new kind of pressure behind it. Let's deal with the so-called centerpiece of the prosecution, the 5-second audio clip. She took a few slow steps forward, but not toward the jury this time. Toward the bench. The anonymous recording that came in on a flash drive slipped under someone's door in a manila envelope like it was part of a thriller novel. She paused, tilted her head slightly. Tell me, Your Honor, are we supposed to accept that? No one breathed, not even the judge. Jasmine reached for the flash drive now resting on the evidence table, holding it up between her fingers like it was contaminated. Let me walk you through what we don't know about this file. We don't know who recorded it. We don't know when it was recorded. We don't know what device was used or whether the clip was spliced, looped, or manipulated. There's no metadata, no raw file, no forensic verification, and most importantly, no chain of custody. She let those last 4 words drop like iron. She turned now, slowly, toward the jury. If I handed you a random envelope on the street with 5 words clipped from someone's voicemail and told you it was proof of a crime, would you convict them? Would you send them to prison because an unnamed stranger told you to believe it? Her tone never wavered. Because that's what's being asked of you now. To ignore everything else, transcripts, context, public record, and trust a ghost in the system. Then she pivoted back to Roberts. The shift in energy was sharp, like a cold wind through marble. Your Honor, she said, voice steady but unmistakably direct, if this court accepts that file, without source, without verification, without even an affidavit of origin, then we are not adjudicating law anymore. Her words cut clean, precise. We are validating hearsay, institutionalizing manipulation, and opening the door to a precedent that will haunt every courtroom that follows this one. The judge stared down at her, but she didn't blink. This isn't just about me, she continued. This is about whether truth can still survive in a room where proof is optional. About whether we still have a justice system or just a performance system where whatever creates the best headline becomes admissible reality. She lifted the flash drive again, then laid it down slowly in front of the bench. Because if this becomes your evidence standard, then anyone can be destroyed by 5 seconds of audio and a well-timed leak. And no one, not me, not you, not anyone, will be saved from that precedent. She took a single step closer. And that's why, she said, firm, unwavering, eyes locked with the Chief Justice, if we accept a nameless, unverifiable audio clip as admissible evidence, then this is no longer a courtroom governed by law. She didn't flinch. It's a political stage, and I won't act in someone else's script. The room cracked under the weight of those words. You could hear it, not in noise but in absence. The scribbles stopped. The jurors sat still, hands motionless. Even the gallery of political insiders and media regulars, people used to spin, used to spectacle, looked shaken, because this wasn't spin. It was exposure. Jasmine turned back to the jury, her voice softer now but more dangerous in its calm. You were shown 5 seconds. I've shown you the full sentence. You were given a mystery file. I've given you government transcripts. You were asked to speculate. I've asked you to verify. Then, after a pause, she finished, not with volume but with gravity. So ask yourselves, what kind of justice are we building if 5 unverified seconds now outweigh 5 years of service, 5 pages of truth, and 1 line that no one wanted you to hear? Our job is to lead, not to gloat. But just as Jasmine lowered herself back into her chair, the prosecution's table erupted. Objection, Your Honor. Drayton's voice cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. His composure, once surgically calm, was gone. He shot to his feet so fast his chair skidded backward with a metallic screech. This is a distraction, he barked, one hand raised, the other trembling as it clutched his notes. Counsel is undermining the integrity of the evidence without any formal forensic rebuttal. She's making a speech, not a legal argument. His face flushed red, eyes darting from the judge to the jury like a man watching control slip through his fingers. This courtroom is not a place of conspiracy theories or political posturing, he growled, his voice rising now, almost desperate. She can't just declare something inadmissible because she doesn't like it. The room held its breath as Drayton kept going, not waiting for permission. That recording, anonymous or not, contains her voice, her exact tone, her exact words, and everyone in this courtroom knows it. He jabbed a finger at the flash drive Jasmine had set down. This isn't about metadata. It's about accountability. We heard her say it. They deserve it. He was pacing now, unraveling by the second. She wants his jury to believe 5 seconds don't matter. That accountability depends on how evidence arrives instead of what it reveals. He pointed at the jury box now, breath short. Don't let her rewrite reality just because she's good with words. But the damage was done. The contrast between Jasmine's precision and Drayton's eruption was stark, undeniable. Where she had been calm, he was frantic. Where she had been fact-driven, he was fuming. Even the jurors who had been leaning toward the prosecution were now shifting back in their seats, visibly unsettled by his sudden heat. Roberts raised a hand slowly, commanding silence with a glance. But the silence this time wasn't procedural. It was a verdict in motion. Because Drayton wasn't objecting to misconduct. He was objecting to losing control. Following Drayton's outburst and the judge's firm call for order, the courtroom once again turned to Jasmine, who hadn't flinched, hadn't moved. She waited just long enough for the air to settle, then rose from her chair, her voice calm but charged like a coiled wire. Since we're now debating what the law allows and what it doesn't, she said, walking slowly to the center of the room again, then we must talk about precedent. Her finger slid another document from the folder, one marked in blue tabs and legal citations. There is one case the prosecution failed to mention, probably because it dismantles the foundation of their entire argument. Her tone sharpened. Jenkins versus Civil Ethics Commission, 2018. She stepped toward the jury box, holding the page up. In that ruling, the Court of Appeals determined that the Hatch Act could not, and I quote, be retrofitted to prosecute modern expressions of political tone absent direct, demonstrable electioneering. She turned toward the judge, gaze unflinching. That case was about a public health official who criticized congressional inaction during a policy update. The Ethics Commission claimed it was partisan. The court ruled it was protected speech. Her voice was stronger now, cutting through the tension like glass through cloth. Why? Because no funds were solicited. No candidates were endorsed. No campaigns were referenced. It was ruled not a violation. She let the words drop like a gavel. She took a few steps, pacing slowly now. The Jenkins decision clarified that the Hatch Act is not a net to catch uncomfortable words. It is a wall to stop institutional abuse of electoral power. The difference matters. She turned sharply. What I said was no different. I reported the results of a federal policy. Not a campaign, not an attack ad. And just like Jenkins, I'm being painted as partisan for refusing to dull the truth to make others feel safe. Her hand tapped the case law firmly. But precedent protects us all, especially when the law is at risk of becoming someone's weapon of convenience. Now, the courtroom felt different again. Not shaken but listening. Respectfully, intently, because Jasmine wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending the rule of law from being twisted to fit a narrative. The silence that followed was not the same one that had settled earlier when Jasmine first walked in or when the audio clip played. This time, it was heavier, but not with accusation, with respect. Something had shifted, tangibly. What had started as an ambush trial had slowly, deliberately transformed into a masterclass in restraint, clarity, and forceful intellect. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the jurors, not the press, not the judge. The entire room, once buzzing with anticipation of a public defeat, now sat frozen under the weight of something no one had expected. Truth that refused to be politicized. At the bench, Chief Justice Roberts finally stirred. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back in his leather chair, brought a hand to his forehead, and rubbed gently, like a man recalculating the meaning of everything he had just witnessed. His other hand moved to the transcript Jasmine had entered into the record. He didn't scan it. He read it, line by line, from the opening remarks of the February 15th press briefing, through the exchange with the reporters, down to the sentence that had become the eye of the storm. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. Roberts narrowed his eyes, staring at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. Then he read it again. The words had a gravity that no 5-second clip could replicate. The fuller sentence didn't sound angry. It didn't sound like propaganda. It sounded like leadership wrapped in realism, a hard truth delivered with restraint. When he finally looked up, his gaze was slower than usual. Heavier, but it was also clearer. Sharper. "Mr. Drayton," he said at last, his voice echoing through the still courtroom like a dropped pin in a cathedral. "Please approach the bench." The courtroom stirred slightly, barely, but enough. All eyes turned to the prosecution's table. Drayton froze mid-sentence, not speaking but clearly working through a dozen responses in his head. His face, once resolute, now registered something new, uncertainty. He straightened his suit, smoothed his tie, and stood with the stiffness of a man who suddenly realized the spotlight was no longer in his favor. His steps were slow but purposeful as he approached the bench. Chief Justice Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Drayton," he began, eyes locked, tone dry as parchment. "This court has heard considerable argument today regarding the 5-second audio recording submitted by your office. Before we proceed further, I have one specific question for the record." He leaned slightly forward, both hands clasped in front of him. The gallery leaned with him. "Can you confirm the chain of custody for this recording?" Drayton blinked. For a man trained in rhetoric, this wasn't a complicated question. It was binary, but he didn't answer it immediately. His lips parted. His tongue darted once toward the corner of his mouth. And for the first time since the trial began, he didn't look prepared. "Well, Your Honor," he began slowly, "we received the file early this morning prior to opening arguments via an encrypted communication from a confidential source." Roberts raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "That's not what I asked." The tension doubled instantly. "I asked if you can confirm the chain of custody." Roberts repeated, "Firmer now. Can you tell this court where the recording originated, who recorded it, when it was recorded, and whether it has remained unedited or unaltered in any way since its creation?" Drayton swallowed. "Everyone saw it. Your Honor, we haven't completed the full trace. The source, while credible, is anonymous, and our office has not yet completed authentication." "Then you cannot confirm the chain of custody," Roberts said flatly, his voice slicing through the air. Drayton's mouth opened to respond again, but he thought better of it. He simply nodded. Barely. A thick pause followed, and with that, something subtle but irreversible happened in the room. The case began to fall apart, not by explosion but by implosion. It didn't unravel in a dramatic outburst. It collapsed under the weight of its own weakness. The prosecution's crown jewel, its dramatic, high-impact, anonymous clip, was now officially without foundation, and the man who had wielded it so confidently minutes earlier now stood at the bench, exposed. Back at her table, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't even blink. Her fingers remained folded over her folder, still calm, still focused, because she had known this moment was coming. She had counted on it, and now it had arrived. The room no longer held silence. It held gravity, the kind that made men shift in their seats without knowing why, the kind that demanded stillness not out of fear but out of reverence. Jasmine hadn't spoken for minutes, and yet every word she'd said earlier still hung in the air like invisible scaffolding. Strong, unshaken. The judge had leaned back, elbow resting gently on the arm of his chair, one hand pressed to his brow, as if even he was struggling to reconcile what had just unfolded in his courtroom. Then came movement. Subtle, deliberate. Robert set down the page he'd been holding, removed his glasses with slow precision, folded them close, and placed them gently on the bench, like a man setting down something fragile. His fingers lingered there for a second. Then, without looking at anyone in particular, he said softly but firmly, "Miss Crockett." Her name rang out like a bell. Jasmine looked up, calm, unwavering, no expectation in her eyes. Only readiness. "I'll be candid with you," Roberts began, his voice carrying a texture that hadn't been there before. "When I took this bench for today's hearing, I had a different assumption in mind. I thought I'd be hearing a defense draped in partisanship, a political maneuver dressed in legal language. I assumed we were in for spin, calculated, careful, and empty." He paused, his gaze lifting directly to Hayes now. "But that's not what you brought into this courtroom." The tension deepened, sharp but silent. The reporters lowered their pens. Even Drayton didn't move. "You brought the law," Roberts continued, "line by line, section by section, and you didn't just recite it. You applied it, with precision, with restraint, with discipline." He gestured briefly to the documents on the bench before him. "You brought me the Hatch Act as written, not as distorted. You brought me Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission and reminded this court that statutes are not shaped by outrage but by precedent and intention." Then his voice dropped slightly, but the weight of it only increased. The prosecution's central claim rested on a 5-second audio clip delivered anonymously, without metadata, without timestamp, without authentication. His fingers tapped the flash drive lightly, twice, like a gavel. That file, in this court's view, fails every standard of admissibility. It cannot be validated. Its chain of custody does not exist, and its submission timing raises more questions than answers. It is therefore excluded from consideration in its entirety. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Roberts looked again to the transcript Jasmine had provided. He picked it up, scanned the lines silently, then read aloud, slowly, for all to hear. "Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat." He set the paper down. "That," he said clearly, "is not a call to vote. It is not a campaign message. It is not an attempt to sway an election or fundraise or solicit partisan support. It is a message of restraint, a message of professionalism, and a direct contradiction to the accusation that Miss Crockett violated the Hatch Act." His hands folded together now, his shoulders straight. "This court finds no evidence of electoral influence, no violation of federal statute, no abuse of office, and no legal justification to pursue this charge further." He paused. "Miss Jasmine Crockett, you are found not liable under the Hatch Act." Somewhere in the gallery, a hand rose to cover a mouth. A juror slowly closed their eyes. The click of a camera shutter was the only sound daring to move. But Roberts wasn't finished. He exhaled slowly, as if shedding years of rigid thinking, and said something no one in that room, no one watching on the feed, no one reporting live, was prepared for. He looked directly at Jasmine, his voice softer now but more personal. "You made me reconsider something today. Something I didn't expect to question. I've read the Hatch Act dozens of times. I've ruled on its application. I thought I knew its purpose." His gaze lingered. "But you reminded me that even statutes must be read with clarity, not convenience. That the law cannot be stretched to fit discomfort, only abuse." He sat back in his chair, quiet, contemplative, and then, in a voice that was almost reflective, he concluded, "You've misunderstood this law for 30 years. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't a vacuum. It was full of vindication, full of reckoning, full of the realization that a single voice, clear, calm, unapologetic, had not only dismantled the prosecution's case, she had rewritten the assumptions of the very man who held the gavel. The gavel's final slam echoed long after the judge's words had hung in the air, but Jasmine Crockett made no show of triumph. As the chamber slowly emptied, she gathered her folder with deliberate care, her expression neither joyous nor defiant, simply composed, like a soldier lowering her weapon after a long, hard-fought battle. As she stepped away from the defense table, her pace was measured, almost ritualistic. Every step echoed the weight of responsibility rather than the cheers of victory. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, a blend of hushed admiration and speculative tension as reporters surged forward like storm-driven waves, desperate for one more quote. "Is this a political victory?" Someone shouted from a cluster of microphones and cameras, their voices mingling with the clamor of flashing bulbs. Jasmine paused at the threshold of the court's massive oak door, her eyes meeting the frantic gaze of the press gathered around the stays. In that brief moment, time seemed to slow. The questions of the media hung in the air like suspended animation, heavy with expectation and controversy. With a calm yet resolute tone that cut through the cacophony, she replied, "No, this isn't a political victory." Her voice was low, measured, but unwavering, a declaration of principles that resonated far deeper than partisan triumph. "This," she continued, her gaze unwavering and voice imbued with the quiet intensity of resolute conviction, "is a victory for the rule of law." Every word she spoke carried the weight of centuries of legal tradition, the promise of fairness over spectacle, and the enduring belief that justice must be free from the sway of political manipulation. As reporters crowded around her, microphones thrust forward like spears seeking the heart of a truth, Jasmine's hands remained steady at her sides, a silent reminder that this battle was won not through grand gestures or applause, but through the meticulous construction of legal clarity. The press hounded her with rapid-fire questions, each one an eager attempt to capture a snippet of what, in public discourse, was deemed a monumental win. Yet despite their barrage, she maintained her composure, her eyes reflecting an inner fire tempered by years of experience on the front lines of justice. "Our system," she declared, her voice clear enough to be heard even over the clamor of chaos, "is not meant to reward flair or to foster culture political theatrics. It is designed to safeguard our democratic principles, ensuring that law and order prevail above raw emotion." Every syllable reverberated like a solemn,